There is a widespread aversion to nuclear power, which is of an intensity that no reasoning could ever justify. People have an irrational aversion to nuclear power. People have an almost religious dislike of nuclear power. An entirely unjustified and irrational, dogmatic hatred of nuclear power. And it isn't just a few people. It is a massive number of people. This is the case all over the Western world, but these attitudes are particularly prevalent in New Zealand, the place where I live, where being anti-nuclear is considered a core component of national identity. People are incredibly hostile towards nuclear power. And why? Because of a couple of disasters which are better chalked up to incompetence and bad equipment than some kind of grand inherent disaster tendency? Most people's only reason for being anti-nuclear consists of vaguely gesturing at a couple of past tragedies that they normally know nothing about. Nothing beyond that the words nuclear and bad are involved in the typical description. The fact of the matter is that we should not be so hostile towards nuclear power. We should be willing to consider it as a potential alternative to the far more dangerous fossil fuels industry which it could replace. It is no exaggeration to say that this irrational aversion could possibly be the death of us. I am no expert on the merits of nuclear power, but I do know one thing. We should be willing to consider the nuclear option. And a great many people are not. A great many people are completely unwilling to even consider that nuclear power could potentially be the answer, or at least a part of it. This is irrational, and this is indefensible, and it is dangerously so. Our rationality could end up digging our grave. In fact, it very likely will. For many, the irrational fear of nuclear energy is stronger than their desire to transition away from fossil fuels. This irrationality cannot continue. We must be willing to consider the options, no matter how uncomfortable we may find them. If we cannot overcome our rationality, there is no hope for us. This irrational aversion is incredibly prevalent and immensely convenient for fossil fuel companies. It needs to stop. We must be willing to consider this matter seriously. Why are people so incapable of grasping the concept of a lesser evil? If you are going to stand around waiting for a perfect solution, you will never find one. You will stand around for years, and the only thing that you will find is death and suffering. Some people have such an irrational aversion to nuclear power that it sometimes comes across as though they would rather die or return to a primitive lifestyle rather than have to live in a nuclear society. I don't care if you find it uncomfortable. We should consider it. When we consider nuclear power, we are considering solutions to a looming apocalypse. You should learn to consider things that make you uncomfortable. This irrational aversion needs to stop. If nuclear power is undesirable, we must come to that conclusion through consideration and reasoning, not a dogmatic, irrational dislike of all things nuclear. For the sake of our rationality and reason, for the sake of survival, discard your irrational aversion.